Welcome into Warchant TV. This is Ira Schofeld, managing editor of Warchant.com. I'm joined today by Matt Connolly, a college sports reporter for On3.com, which is our sister network or our parent network. I don't know exactly the relationships, but we're a part of the same team. And Matt is a guy who has covered sports in South Carolina for a long time, covered DJ Uiagalelei during his time at Clemson. And so we're going to get this is basically DJ Palooza Day. We're going to get perspectives from Matt, who covered him at Clemson, and then also a friend of ours, Joe Freeman, who covered him at Oregon State last year. And so we're going to kind of give you two sides of the DJ story. So thanks, Matt, for joining us. How you doing, man?
Yeah, for sure. You already got the pronunciation down. I'm impressed. So you're ahead of the game.
So here's the thing. So when Florida State was playing them a couple of years ago, I was like everybody else. I was like DJ U, or I would just say DJ. I just wouldn't say anything. And then one day I was like, this is really bad. Like we need to, it can't be that hard. Just figure it out.
Right.
And so I worked on it for that game 2 years ago when he beat Florida State over here in Duke. So so I'm excited. I'm excited to have him here. And Florida State fans are certainly excited to have him here. I wanted to talk, when I talked to Joe Freeman, I'm going to talk to more about last year and kind of DJ as the more refined, older college football player on his second school. But talking to you, I kind of want to go back a little bit to when he got to Clemson and all the excitement and then kind of how he handled what were 2 years that probably weren't what he was expecting when he went there. He comes in after Deshaun and Trevor, and I'm sure. He was the USA Today National Player of the Year, I think, as a junior in high school. Threw for 1 million yards in high school out there in California. When he came to Clemson, I'm guessing it was as big of a coronation as you could expect with a kid showing up on a college football campus.
Yeah, for sure. At that point, Clemson was coming off of Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. Kelly Bryant was in between, but
right.
Those were the 2 5-star guys that they had. And now, the thinking was DJ Uiagalelei was going to come in and be the next guy. He was going to keep everything rolling, be the next guy to kind of the 5-star quarterback that leads Clemson to a national title. So, yeah, expectations were high for sure when he arrived, and people kind of thought that he was ready to be the next great quarterback at Clemson who, would go down as a national title winning quarterback.
So in that 2020 season, which I know a lot of Florida State fans want to forget, but it happened. And, he goes into a game that season, and I think he was, 31 of 40 against Boston. Was it Boston College? He was like 31 of 40 for 340 yards or something like that. He had some huge moments when he first got thrown into action. So what do you think happened from then until he became the starter? Because it just obviously didn't go as well. His first year as a starter was not, 2021 was not anywhere close to that. What were your perspectives on kind of what, and I know there were a lot of other changes at Clemson with the coordinators and all that. What do you think was happening there?
Yeah, so the first game was Boston College, and no one really knew what to expect. Trevor Lawrence had just tested positive for COVID, and so you're kind of thinking, now this freshman who we've heard a lot about is going to get thrown into a big-time game. How's he going to respond? And he played well against Boston College, led Clemson to a win. And then, the game that I remember, and I think a lot of people remember, is the next week at Notre Dame.
Right.
That's a tough opponent. You're playing in South Bend. You're going on the road. I think that there weren't a lot of expectations for him for that game. And he goes and throws for 439 yards. I think it was the record quarterback had ever thrown for against Notre Dame. So on the road, he's 439 yards, 2 touchdowns. They end up losing in double overtime. And so, yeah, if you thought the hype was high whenever he first got there, it was out of the world after that. So, after that game, he goes back to the bench pretty much for the rest of the year. Trevor Lawrence is back healthy. But, yeah, certainly after that game against Notre Dame, just expectations were through the roof.
So then coming into the next year, I think that's right at the same time as NIL becomes a thing, right? Because I think he got the big Dr. Pepper commercials and Bojangles, right. And he looked like he was going to be one of the stars of college football.
100%.
Did the personnel change that much, or was it the offense changing because the coordinator's changing? And I think Jeff Scott left after 2020, I think, or 2019 or 2020, and then Tony Elliott, they both became head coaches, and they were kind of the brain trust on offense. Looking back on it, did you feel like that was just too much change in general? Did they just not have the same talent around him?
There was a lot. So there were a lot of moving pieces in. So they go into the the 21 season. I believe Jeff Scott had left. Yeah, Jeff Scott was gone by that point, but Tony Elliott was still there.
Right.
I believe. And so they go into that 2021 season, and you've lost your co-offensive coordinator. You've lost some talent up front. The top two receivers are gone, Cornell Powell. And I believe Amari Rogers was the other guy that was gone from that 2020 team. And so you're going into 2021 with a lot of new parts, but I think Clemson fans still felt pretty good about having DJ based on what they had seen at Notre Dame. And so you open the season against Georgia, and you score 3 points, in a game that had a lot of hype, a lot of anticipation in Charlotte. College game day was there. And DJ didn't really play well necessarily, but there was just a lot that was going on in that game. There was bad offensive line play. I think he was sacked like 7 times. I mean, he just got beat up in that game. And so, I think it was, I don't want to say like a wake up call, but it was almost like, oh my gosh, like this offense that just went from scoring points on everybody. And yeah, they lost to Ohio State in the playoff, but still had a lot coming back. Now they're scoring 3 points against Georgia. So, yeah, that was the first moment where I think it was like, oh, this maybe isn't going to be, what kind of people we're hoping for.
Just kind of like a reality splashed water in everybody's face,
Right.
I'm guessing at the time. And then, throughout that season, again, they still won 10 games, I think, that season,
Mm-hmm.
Not a disastrous season, but just not what Clemson had been doing. During the course of that season, were fans down on him? Were they more questioning what was going on around him, and how did he handle all that? Because that had to be tough, man. Like, this is a guy who set all these records and was such an amazing quarterback his whole life, and now he finally gets the job, and things aren't going the way he thought. Like, what was your perception of how he handled all that, and what was he dealing with from the fans?
Yeah, I think he handled it pretty well. There was definitely some frustration. I mean, just because it wasn't, I don't think what anyone really expected. They, like you said, they won 10 games, but this was a team that had made the playoffs 6 straight years. And so now you're playing in the Cheez-It Bowl instead of playing in a college football playoff game. Against South Carolina, they beat South Carolina, but he threw for less than 100 yards. They had some other games where it was closer than probably it should have been. I don't think he threw for over 250 yards in a game that year. So it was just a really weird season, and not at all what people were expecting after the way the Notre Dame game had gone the year before, and Boston College too that you mentioned. So yeah, I think it was frustration with him. I think there was frustration with the offensive staff, the playmakers. I mean, obviously the offensive coordinator, but even receiver had taken a step back. Offensive line was struggling some. So yeah, I think it was just frustration in general on the offensive side of the ball, and he was certainly a part of that too.
So then in 2022, and at that point now, Tony Elliott's gone too because he went to Virginia. Jeff Scott had gone to USF. His 2022 numbers are not that bad. In fact, when he came to Doak, I thought he played great against Florida State. Florida State, I thought played pretty well in that game, but I thought that was the best he played all year, and at least that I saw, the games I saw. But even look at his numbers for the year. He completed 62% of his passes, which is better than he had done. 22 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And then like last year at Oregon State, I think it was 21 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. So these last 2 years, he's got 43 touchdowns and 14 interceptions, if my limited math skills are correct. So it seems like he's kind of turned into more of what people thought, even though he's not quite as prolific as probably people would have thought. But did you see his last year at Clemson? Did you feel like it was coming the way it was supposed to?
Yeah, it was a really weird year. Like, he left that Florida State game and he was a Heisman candidate. I mean, he was top 10, being mentioned top 10 Heisman in several different places. And so, at that point, I think Clemson was undefeated, had just gotten a big win over Florida State, and I think people kind of thought like, all right, this is what we expected. You mentioned the Florida State game where he played great. He had 5 touchdown passes at Wake Forest and outdueled Sam Hartman in a game that was a shootout where the defense really struggled. So he had a lot of really good moments during that season at Clemson. It was just such a weird year in that he ended the season so poorly. And, they ended up losing that game to South Carolina, which really, I mean, you're talking about losing, I think it was a 40-game home winning streak. You've won a lot of games in a row, 7 or 8, I think, in a row against South Carolina at that time. And so, I think fans were frustrated at that point, but Clemson still had a chance to make the playoff going into that game. And he was 8 of 29 passing
Oof.
for 99 yards, 28% completion percentage, and really just couldn't get anything going. And so, I think it goes back to, again, like a lot of that, you can put the blame on him. He certainly didn't play well in that game, but the receivers didn't help him either. The offensive line struggled too. I mean, it was just a struggle for whatever reason for the offense that year. But yeah, certainly after that game, there was a lot of frustration. And I think that's when, I think he gets a lot of negative talk on social media from Clemson fans. It's saying, oh, DJ, he was so bad and blah, blah, blah. I think really that stems from that game, to be honest. I mean, he had some other games where he wasn't great in his career, but Clemson fans kind of block out the games at Doak Campbell where he plays really well and leads Clemson to a win, or at Wake Forest, and they kind of focus on that South Carolina game or maybe a couple of others where he struggled. So, I think when you look at it from a big picture perspective, I mean, he's got a chance, I think he should be viewed as a quarterback who maybe was inconsistent, but when he was on, I think he was as good as just about anybody, and Clemson fans don't necessarily remember the DJ that was on and putting up impressive stats in some games. They just kind of focus on the way he ended that 2022 season.
So, and then, he ends up getting benched for Cade Klubnik, and, the percent. So I think some things I've heard down here was that even last season for Clemson, after DJ was gone, that there were I heard that some of the players weren't thrilled that Cade got chosen over DJ. The impression I got was that DJ was really popular, and people felt like maybe he wasn't given or treated maybe the best way or whatever. How well liked was he up there? Because I always wonder when a guy because when he got there and he got these big NIL deals, you wonder if he's going to be kind of seen as like a different guy, almost like the celebrity of the locker room, and how well would they get along? But it seemed like he was well liked in the locker room. Is that your perception, or what was your perception of that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know as much about like people or players being upset with the bench, and just because I think at the point when it finally happened, it just kind of had to. I mean, he was coming off of an 8 for 29 game, and then they went
Right.
3 and out, I think, the first 2 series against North Carolina. And I remember he threw a screen pass that I think like kind of bounced out to a receiver, and it was like, man, they've got to do something. So, I think at that point it kind of had to happen. But yeah, he was certainly very well liked by his teammates. I mean, he was very, very popular player. The coaching staff, the players, nobody had anything bad to say about him. Media, I mean, he was one of the favorite players I've covered. Super, super nice. There were times where after games, actually, I remember the Florida State game where he stood around after the interviews were over and talked to the media a little bit just about, how cool it was to play at Doak Campbell. And that was a place he had kind of watched on TV growing up and watching the tomahawk chop and stuff, how that was something that he had always remembered as a little kid and how cool it was to play there. So pretty cool that he'll be obviously going back there now. But yeah, he was just a very nice guy to sit around and talk with. He's a guy that you could go and have lunch with and have a conversation. And just a very normal dude to be a 5-star quarterback with all the hype and everything that he had coming in. So yeah, I was a big fan of DJ's when he was at Clemson. A lot of fun to cover, a lot of fun to watch him play, and certainly hoping he does well at Florida State.
Yeah, it seems. I mean, again, people coming up now, when you guys watch when the interview with Joe Freeman, he says a lot of similar things. He talked about when DJ came out there, how he took the time to go up and individually introduce himself to all the media. Almost like he didn't know if they would know who he was. Like he just walked up to them and just kind of, hey, I'm DJ, that kind of thing. So it seems like there's a lot of humility there, which is kind of interesting for his background.
Yeah, 100%.
What when you look at again, just him as a player, when in some of those games where the completion percentage does get real low, and I know again I defended the guy because I thought when I would watch Clemson that year, especially that 2022 season, but even the 2021 season, it was so obvious that the coaches had no confidence in him by the way they called plays. Like they would not, if it was an obvious passing situation, they would not just drop him back and let him really try to read the defense and make a throw. So many draws on third downs and things like that. I'm sure that affected him. And I saw some comments from him later where he felt like, he could sense that they didn't have a lot of confidence in him. But in the games where he struggled, was it more just not knowing where to go with the ball, or just not being real accurate, or was there something like could you put your finger on? And I know there was a lot of other things going poorly around him as well, but was there something that particularly you thought, well, he really needs to improve on this area?
If there was one thing I could pinpoint, I would say it was just when things went wrong, he just didn't respond well. Like he would lose his confidence, and it seemed like if one play went bad, he didn't necessarily respond well to that, especially early on in his career, or I guess in the 2021 and 2022 seasons, early on that second year. I mean, it just seemed like if something went wrong, he kind of struggled to overcome it. So man, it's hard to pinpoint. Like it's hard to say that one certain thing caused him to struggle during those couple of years at Clemson when he did struggle. But I think it would just be a combination of losing confidence, and then when things started going poorly, maybe not being able to always bounce back from that. There were times when he did it for sure. Like, there were definitely times where he overcame a poor play or a poor start to a game, but there were also times where you could just kind of feel it, where like he lost his confidence and things kind of started spiraling out of control, and he couldn't get it back together.
No, that makes sense, man. I'm a big believer in confidence. I mean, just for having kids that played sports and just being around sports and I think one of Mike Norvell's greatest strengths, this is, as you're talking through that, I'm kind of excited for DJ, because I think one of Mike Norvell's greatest strengths is he believes so much in players that I think it makes them believe in themselves sometimes at a higher level maybe than they should believe in themselves. And
Right.
so I think a guy like that could help him a lot. And again, watching DJ play at Clemson, if I could feel that they didn't have confidence in him, I'm sure he felt that way as well. So that, maybe this could have to be in a perfect marriage. On that note, I mean, what do you think? What kind of reaction do you think DJ will get? When when he plays Florida State, or when he's playing for Florida State against Clemson this season, how do you think he'll handle that, and what will the reaction be, you think, from Clemson fans?
Yeah, it'll certainly be an interesting game. Like I'm really looking forward to watching that one. I think teammate wise, like I think his teammates, or his former teammates, I should say, will embrace him. I think you'll see those guys talking before, after, and even during the game some, just because he was such a well liked player on that team, and there are a lot of guys still around. I'm sure it'll be tough for DJ in some ways, just playing against a coaching staff that well, players well, that kind of stuff. So I'm sure it'll be some mixed emotions for sure, but he did a pretty good job of kind of, I guess, taking all that outside noise out. He heard certainly fans. I mean, Clemson fans weren't always thrilled when he was here. He was well aware what was being said and did a good job of tuning that out for the most part and just going and playing ball. So I'm guessing he'll be able to do that. I've seen a lot of Clemson fans saying, "Oh, that game just got easier, and that'll be an easy win now," and that kind of stuff. And so, like I said, I think that kind of goes back to the way he ended the 2022 season. But I've been I've been telling anyone who will listen, if you go back and watch some of those games from 2022 and especially this past year, I thought he really played well. I watched him a good bit this year, just following along, just because I wanted to kind of see how he did at Oregon State, and he made a lot of big time throws. I think he was a lot more consistent this year and took a lot of shots down the field for sure. So yeah, I've tried to caution Clemson fans. If you think that DJ is just going to go and just be absolutely horrible at Florida State, that's not what I would count on. But yeah, I think he'll handle it well, and like you said, I think it's a good fit there in Tallahassee.
Yeah, also because he, talking to Joe again, people can hear it after this interview. Oregon State did not exactly have a lot of big receivers with big catch radiuses, and he'll
Right.
have some of those guys here, Hakeem Williams and Kentron Portier and whoever else they get out of the portal. He won't have Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson, but he'll have some big targets. So hopefully that'll be good for him as well. Well, thanks, Matt, man. I really appreciate your time, and I think Florida State fans are going to love, again, the way you seem to like him and seem to like covering him. Joe is very much the same. Sounds like he's a guy that I think Florida State fans are going to like just rooting for um, as a player. So thanks for sharing that with us, and looking forward to seeing how it goes.
Yes, sir. Yeah, 100%. Same here. I'm looking forward to watching him, and think he'll do well down at Florida State.
All right. Thanks, Matt. And stay tuned. We'll be back next with Joe Freeman from the Oregonian. Welcome into Warchant TV. This is Ira Schofel, managing editor of warchant.com, and I'm joined today by a special guest who has got some interesting experience in covering a guy that Florida State fans are going to get to know a lot about, new quarterback transfer, DJ Uiagalelei. Joined today by Joe Freeman, who is a senior writer with the Oregonian and OregonLive.com. And I know, Joe, you didn't cover DJ day to day like a beat writer, but you did have a lot of experience seeing him. And we're just trying to get a better perspective talking to you and also talking to Matt Connolly, who covered him at Clemson, to get a better perspective of what DJ brings to Florida State and what Florida State fans can expect. So thanks for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I appreciate you having me on. It's he's an interesting dude when he hit the portal. I was not expecting Florida State to be a landing spot, but in hindsight, it kind of makes a lot of sense. So yeah, let's get into it.
So first of all, real quick though, to give Florida State fans a little bit more perspective on you, actually are from Tallahassee and grew up like cheering for the Noles. So what just tell us a little bit about your background and then also maybe how you got into sports writing.
Oh yeah, sure. So I was born in Tallahassee. Parents kind of got separated. Dad moved away, kind of went back and forth. So the last year that I actually went to school in Tallahassee was 7th grade. So then ended up kind of coming out to college here in Oregon and just stayed here ever since. Was a high school writer in my high school newspaper and sucker. I'm a sucker and I'm still here, churning away just like you, Ira.
If we only knew then what we know now.
No, best laid intentions. But I've been here at the Oregonian for almost, over 20 years, almost 25 years, and covered the Trailblazers for about 14 or 15 years. And then since then in the pandemic, kind of got out of that and have done mostly enterprise, did a little editing, kind of been all over the place. And then last year covered last season college football exclusively. We had a lot going on here with everything going on with Oregon State. And then, Oregon obviously had a remarkable season too. So yeah.
Go back and, obviously Florida State fans and media, myself, we were very intimately familiar with DJ during his time at Clemson. But when he went in the portal, when they made the move to Cade Klubnik, I think a lot of us just kind of moved on. And I knew he ended up at Oregon State. How did he end up at Oregon State? Do you remember much of that story?
It's actually, it's a funny story. And there's a little bit of connection to how he ended up at Florida State, in that he waited and he was very calculated with his decision. I was kind of like you. He hit the portal, didn't think much of it. And then all of a sudden he kind of hits Oregon State's radar. And the way that happened, it's pretty funny. He handpicked Oregon State. I guess he kind of did a lot of research and kind of explored his options kind of, after what happened at Clemson. And I think in hindsight, we see, with Dabo and the change in staff there and everything, an offense that maybe was carried by some quarterbacks and skill players that he didn't have. He kind of wanted a pro style offense. He wanted someone to call plays. He wanted a strong running game, a balanced offense. And amazingly, I don't know anybody that would have predicted it. He handpicked Oregon State, reached out to the Oregon State coaches, and then didn't hear from them. Like 1 week goes by, 2 weeks goes by, and he's kind of like, well, what the heck, man? And so somehow or another, he got back channeled to someone on Oregon State staff, and they're like, oh, they were knee deep in bowl prep. It is what happened.
Okay.
And so eventually, got a hold of Coach Jonathan Smith, and their offensive coordinator was Brian Lindgren, and talked to them several times on the phone. And it's the craziest thing, Ira. He committed sight unseen. He didn't take a visit, didn't come out and check out campus, and talking to him later on, he's kind of like, I didn't care if I played in Alaska or Florida or wherever. I didn't care if it was a city or a town. It was very much a business decision for him. And so I couldn't help think about that when I felt like he pretty much had to wait around this time. I mean, we're all waiting for Cam Ward to figure out what the heck he was going to do. And so, he very clearly identified Florida State now as his choice, went out, this time took a visit and, kind of played the waiting game there. But so that's how he came to be in Corvallis. And, kind of like I intimated, he playing the offense that he did at Clemson, I think he didn't get a lot of chances to check. He didn't have a lot of multiple sets of receivers. He kind of ran this basic spread, offense. And he wanted to be in a pro style offense with someone who kind of, to obviously help his chances at the NFL. And so, he identified Oregon State staff and the Beavers.
That's fascinating because, the whole time he was at Clemson, I'm sure you were paying attention to him too because you're a Florida State guy. But it just seemed like it felt like they had these like restrictor plates on him. And I'm not saying, I don't know how good he can be. I don't know if he could have been any better, but when you watch them play, it was like they were trying to turn him into a robot or something. They would never let him throw it in obvious passing situations. They kept draws on quarterback draws on 3rd and long. I mean, and you could see the frustration in him. And at the time, again, like we were all thinking, okay, well, maybe it's all him because Clemson had been so good. But then you see what happens with Cade Klubnik, and you start wondering, okay, and obviously the fact that Tony Elliott had left and Jeff Scott had left, you start wondering, okay, maybe the problem really was at Clemson. What was, in terms of his play on the field, I know you look at his numbers at Oregon State, not a great completion percentage and not otherworldly numbers, but how did it look like when you were watching him play?
Very kind of up and down. He would have an incredible 23 for 28, 280 yards and 3 touchdown game. And then he'd have a 15 for 31. And I don't know if it was a change in system, if it's just who he is, if it's Oregon State's personnel. Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren run a very run heavy set, kind of a stretch zone style. And they like to run the ball. And they have one of the more underrated running backs, Damian Martinez, in the country. And they long have had a lot of good running backs at Oregon State quietly. And so, I don't know if it was not able to get in a rhythm, repeatedly, because when you don't drop back to throw 40 times, it can be difficult. I will say this. It kind of reminds me of some of those during the lean years of Jimbo when, we had those 5'11", 5'10" wide receivers.
Right.
Oregon State's main receivers this year were 5'11", 5'8", and 5'8". And so I can't imagine that helps a quarterback. Even I wouldn't want to necessarily throw to that group. So it'll be interesting to see with a more dynamic and a more physically gifted set of guys how he evolves. But I will say, he was he's a very humble kid. He's a very, very mature kid. He moved out to Corvallis with his girlfriend. I'm pretty sure he's engaged. I think they're engaged now.
It seemed like, and I don't know a lot about his details, but it seemed like he had a young lady with him on the visit to Tallahassee as well.
And so they actually met in Clemson. Kind of a funny backstory with that. They were just chilling on the bus. He was going somewhere his first semester at Clemson. I think he was an early enrollee, and he sees this girl that he thought was beautiful, and he just kind of approaches her, and next thing you know, here we are. So she was a volleyball player at Clemson. Yeah, so that's how they met. They met on a random bus ride. But yeah, so he came out, to the Northwest with her, and they lived together, and she was kind of instrumental. And he had a really rough spring in Corvallis. You could tell he didn't grasp the offense. He wasn't confident in a lot of the throws and the reads he was making, which, I mean, totally makes sense. You're learning a whole new playback and a whole new terminology and completely different system from what Dabo does at Clemson, obviously. And so, he really, dug into the homework there, and he would work with the Oregon State staff during the day, learning everything. And then at night with his girlfriend, they would go up to a whiteboard. She would call out sets, call out plays, and he would go up and draw them out on the board. And so that was kind of how he, kind of worked on that. But I went on a tangent there. I don't even remember where we were going.
No, it's cool. And it brought me to a different place was, and you'll relate to this again, because you're watching Florida State, but the only really 1-year transfer kind of guy that I can remember that Florida State's brought in as long as I've been covering him was the Everett Golson situation. And I remember talking to Jimbo when they signed Everett Golson, and I remember asking him, is he really going to be able to learn your offense in just a few months? And he wasn't even getting here till the summer.
Right.
And Jimbo was, of course, he was so confident that, it's just, we all run the same plays. It's just terminology. It'll be no problem at all. And Everett Golson was fine. I think they still won 10 games. It wasn't like he was terrible, but it wasn't a seamless transition either. I guess, having seen him go through this once before, how big of a challenge do you think that is to come in and be a quarterback? I guess this, it's be a similar situation. He'll be here for the spring and summer and then play in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a challenge. It should be a whole new system and again, a whole new terminology and everything. I guess going through it once can't hurt though, right? It certainly would help him. So he's kind of got his system down. I imagine him and his girlfriend or now fiance will be working on that whiteboard again in Tallahassee. But Jimbo's system, as you well know, is seemingly incredibly difficult. I mean, he needed a once in a generation quarterback to kind of lead him to the promised land there. But and so I don't know how that compares with Mike. It seems like, listening to you guys and reading you guys, that he kind of adjusts what he does based upon his personnel a lot more than Jimbo would ever dare.
That seems to be the case.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I can't imagine that. I would imagine that would help him. But I just get the feeling that this was a very business-like decision again for DJ. And it seemed like he picked Florida State, patiently waited for the chance to do it and pounced on it. And so, like any business decision, I think he's going to go on and work his tail off. And he did that at Oregon State as well, struggled in the spring. And they had an incredible freshman, Aiden Childs, who came in, true freshman. And he has since left with Jonathan Smith to Michigan State. So they think, that shows you how highly they thought of him. And he really pushed DJ. And Oregon State had their previous starter who was, kind of a game manager sort of a guy. But and they pushed him in the spring. But by the time fall camp came around, you could see his understanding of the playbook, and he grasped it a lot better, felt a lot more comfortable. And so by that point, it was pretty clear, midway through, that DJ was the guy and had kind of separated himself. Kind of an interesting note that I brought up now that I brought up Aiden Childs is about 4 or 5 games into the season, Oregon State started going to use Aiden Childs for 1 series a game. They would bring him in. It was a 3rd or 4th series every single game until the Oregon game, which, you have to check your ego as a guy who's the guy coming in. You're the transfer. You're a big time recruit back in the day. And so I think that shows you a little bit too about his teammanship or whatever, and what a good teammate he is, and just, a humble guy. He'll come in. He's very stoic. He's very even keeled. He says a lot without saying anything, if that makes sense. So don't get hopes up for some very engaging interviews. He's a very professional guy in that standpoint. But I got the sense that his teammates really respected him. I kind of have this scene in my head after the Oregon State lost at Arizona, and it was a brutal loss for them. It pretty much ended they were a fringe Pac-10, 12 at the end, their championship contender, but it pretty much dashed their title hopes. And, I saw guys dropping F-bombs on the sidelines, and I saw guys embraced in tears in the tunnel leading to the locker room, and kind of walking through that scene. Outside the locker room, every guy that came in, DJ stood there and kind of gave him a fist bump or patted their head or gave him a little hug, and, kind of keep your head up. And so, he's a guy who doesn't, I don't know that he says a lot in that standpoint, but he has this presence in a leadership role that he just kind of oozes is that. And I think, what has he started? 48 right. games or something. And you can't replace that. And this is where my fandom kind of crosses over. It's like, was Brock Glenn really going to be able to give you that? And did we really believe in Tate? I don't know. Maybe if he had gotten a full camp, a full chance to be the guy. But you can't make up for that experience and the ability. He does have some ability. So from that standpoint, I think he does bring a lot, to the locker room there.
Yeah, and going back to your point earlier about Jimbo and Norvell, the differences, and I do think that is a big difference. You go back to when James Blackman had to take over as a true freshman, and it just felt like this poor kid was being asked to run the full offense, even though Jimbo would say it wasn't. It kind of felt like it was. And then you look at Mike Norvell and the way he's tailored his offense around different quarterbacks through the years back when he was at Arizona State, obviously right. Memphis and Florida State. So you'd like to think that the offense will look a little bit different in this game. In the games, in some of the bigger games, like obviously Oregon was a tough game, and they played some really tough opponents and tough games. And like you said, in a couple of those games, he didn't play particularly well statistically. How did he handle those? I mean, did you feel like he ever seemed like overwhelmed, or is it just the plays just weren't there? Like the completions didn't happen?
I never got the sense he was overwhelmed or in over his head or anything like that. The one game that really kind of made you raise your eyebrows was they had their first loss was a really bad loss at Washington State. I think it was the 3rd or 4th week in the season, kind of the first adversity that had hit. And he was not very good in that. He was very up and down and had a good second half. The final score is not as close as the game might suggest watching it with your eyeballs. But very even keel. Like I said, he's just kind of steady Eddie. I remember for a story I wrote on him before the season, talking to his high school coach. He went to a very famed high school,
Right.
Bosco High School in California. And I mean, he was, 1, 2, 3 AB top recruits in the country, right there with Bryce Young and Justin Fields. Fields might have been a year earlier, but a very high level recruit. And, his coach, I remember this story his coach told me about. Might have been his second to last high school game. And he was playing against Bryce Young. And it was an epic modern day versus Bosco. I mean, I don't know the California high school scene, but they're very prominent high schools. And
the high schools we see on ESPN.
Right. Exactly. And so DJ's team got down something like 28-5. They were just getting there, what's handed to them. And the coach said it was the first time DJ had always been very stoic and very calm and very even keeled. And he kind of lost his mind. He started shouting to the crowd, like trying to get the team ramped up and just, light a spark into them. And then he just took off, and they ended up having this epic comeback. He threw for 444 yards and 5 touchdowns. They came back and they won, 39-35 or something like that. And it's just people in California high school circles still talk about that game just because of, Bryce Young, what he went on to do and where DJ is. And so, he's generally speaking, a very kind of even keel, steady Eddie guy, but he does have that, kind of next level in him, I guess, when he gets ramped up. But through all the ups and downs, and you have to appreciate you think we've had a tough month of December in Tallahassee. And as a Florida State fan, I can assure you that I was in depression for 2 or 3 days there after the snub. But imagine playing at Oregon State this last year. Are you kidding me? And there's this feeling that this was, not the end, but man, this is obviously.
Yeah, no telling what it's good. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And so somehow or another, a coach who eventually had one foot out the door and left, and all these guys, they kept everything together in a season of pretty high expectations. They got inside the top 10 of the AP poll at one point and had a really strong season for Oregon State. And throughout it all, the locker room remained connected. And I think he was a big part of that, just because of his personality and because of his presence and because of his leadership. And, he's a guy, the team, he's like I said, he's a humble and mature guy, and he tends to get along, I think, with a lot of different crowds. Now, he helped himself out. He's a Beats sponsor, Beats headphones. Right. He's one of their ambassadors, and he gifted the whole team Beats headphones, when he got, so he does a lot of stuff like that. But you just got the feeling that inside that thing is a real, kind of the cliche, what you do out in the media is a genuine guy. In fact, it reminds me, the first time I ever met him, it was in spring. It was his first kind of interview since he landed in Corvallis. And, there was a bunch of us there at Reser Stadium in the corner, and he kind of comes over. We're standing there waiting, and he walks up to every one of us and shakes our hands and introduces them. Hey, I'm DJ. Hey, I'm DJ. Hey, I'm DJ.
Wow.
And, I've been around the block, Ira. I'm like, what is this? Is he got some PR handler? Is he taking some, is he trying to deflect the questions coming his way? And,
right.
A month or two later, when I talked to his high school coach, I told him that, and I was like, I'm remain skeptical. And he's like, Joe, it is 100% genuine. He is the most down to earth, decent human you'll meet. He's what you see is what you get. And he still goes around the high school. He works out there, or I'm probably not now because I imagine he's in Tallahassee. But he was a part. His younger brother, who was a defensive lineman at Oregon, was still in the program, so he was still around. But everybody at his high school loved him, and seemingly everybody at Oregon State liked him a lot too.
No, it's cool to hear, and that's what one of the things I heard some this past year with things not going well at Clemson was that there were issues in the locker room where guys who were not thrilled that the coaching staff picked Cade over DJ because DJ was pretty well liked. So I was curious how quickly he kind of became well liked out there, and it sounds like it was pretty quickly. So.
Yeah, it was. And what's interesting, and Lord knows I talked to him multiple times about it. I'm sure everybody else did too. You didn't hear him come out and just crush Dabo,
right?
Or he didn't come out and just mutilate anybody on Clemson. Every time I talked to him about that, and he was always, effusive in his praise for the situation. He talked about missing his brothers and he would never change his experiences and all the things you're supposed to say. And I assume he meant it, because at any point, he could have, they've fallen apart since he left in certain respects. So, my understanding, he's very well liked. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Joe, thanks a lot so much, man. I appreciate your time, and hopefully, man, we can get you some on some more offerings in the future, because you're obviously know plenty about Florida State, and you've obviously been covering college football for a long time. So I appreciate it. If we can ever help you down here, if the next time somebody from Florida, you never know in this world,
you never
college
know
football, who knows who might end up transferring out west. So, thanks again for your time, man.
I appreciate it. Nice meeting you. And like I said, I'm a loyal Warchant subscriber, so you'll still get my business here.
we appreciate it. Maybe we can get Gene to throw you a comp at some point.
There you go.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Talk to you soon.
Take it easy, Ira. Take care.